Okay, well, kia ora tātou, and welcome to the final 2 of 8 pieces of teaching on small group leadership, which we've been packing into 3 30-minute segments. My apologies that I'm not there today. I'm overseas at the time when our group is meeting, so I'm sitting here in a room pretending you're in front of me with Brett on the camera, and hopefully this will be useful. The 2 things we're going to look at today are group management skills and then at some planning skills that will bring everything we've looked at in the previous 7 segments together into one picture. And the title that I've had at the top of your pages, and hopefully there's notes being passed out to you at the moment, has been Planning for Discipleship. The basic idea is that if we just run off our intuition week by week when we're leading a small group, we might not hit the target of actually having measurable growth and change in people's lives. Because disciples aren't born, disciples are made. There's a certain amount of Christ-likeness that will transfer from one to another simply by the fact that we're in a room together. But there's a stack of things within discipleship that actually require intentionality on the part of the leader. The key word we talked about earlier for a disciple was choice. They have to choose to grow when presented with an opportunity. The key word for a disciple maker, which is what we are as church leaders and small group leaders, is intentionality. We have to present people with those choices and with those opportunities. To have a look at group management skills, I remember when I first started talking or teaching Bible in schools. I was around about, actually, first of all, 19 years of age, but then again in a number of classrooms for a few years in a row from age 21, 22 onwards. I had no clue how to manage 30 kids within a class. And I remember feeling embarrassed because I'd walk into a particular class where the teacher had complete control of the students. I would then do my 30 minutes, they would be interrupting, they'd be walking around, I'm telling kids off constantly, trying to maintain control. And then the teacher would come back in and I'd hope to have the closest semblance to order that we'd had the whole 30 minutes as she walked in to prevent myself being embarrassed too much. And I realized that in all my brilliance as a person in my early 20s who knew everything, that maybe there were some things about group management that I didn't actually understand. So I asked her if she'd sit in on my Bible in Schools lessons for a few weeks so that she could teach me some things. And she gave me some tips that really did change the way I engaged. If we think of an illustration I probably used in one of the previous sessions, imagine a primary school teacher who's teaching in the primary school across the road from us at our church. And he or she is teaching 6 or 8-year-olds, things that they knew themselves when they were 10, 11 and 12 years of age. And yet they've been at school age 13 through 18. And then they've paid $20,000 a year for maybe 3 to 4 years of tertiary education to have the privilege of teaching children things they already knew when they were 11 and 12 years old. And the question has to be asked, why do you need to spend $80,000 in 3 or 4 years of your life on tertiary education to teach children things you already know? And I think the answer is because there are group management skills involved, and because there are curriculum and planning skills involved to actually be an effective educator. A teacher has 30 children in a class with a variety of personalities, with a variety of learning abilities and disabilities, and somehow has to keep that classroom in order to achieve measurable educational outcome goals. And I suggest that for us in the church environment, it's exactly the same. It's just that we get to have maybe 12 to 14 people in our church small group, but there's still a variety of people. We want an semblance of order. We want this to go in a direction. We want measurable life change. And we need to bring our skills and all of the leadership and planning acumen we have to the table. I think there's often a misnomer that to be spirit-led means to make it up every week. But I think that's actually negligence where God has given us skills and abilities. We should bring the best of what we have to the table. We should bring excellence to the table in our leadership. Being spirit-led is about being prayerful as we plan, but it's also about that listening to the voice of the Spirit at the moment. We will drop all of our plans on the week if we feel the Spirit leads or if opportunity suggests that we should. So hopefully that made sense as a foundation. Let's have a look at group management skills. There's an acronym in the notes that you've got here. It's LIGHT, L-I-G-H-T. And I've taken this acronym from Trinity Christian Centre in Singapore. There's no need to remember the acronym nor every point that I'm going to make. It's simply a coat hanger to communicate a number of group management tips. And so the goal here really is firstly that you'd pick up on anything that's useful for you. The second goal, I've given you pretty full notes, is that you could take this away and share this with others when you begin to release them to lead a discussion. Preparing your content, preparing your heart is only a part of discipling a group on a given topic. Somehow handling the responses and the engagement with those dozen people in the room is the rest of it. And the truth is that the outcome will be largely determined by this human dynamic more so than the spiritual dynamic when it comes down to it. Okay, so L, we launch a question. Nothing profound there, except to note again that we talked earlier about launching, guiding, and application questions. And so when we begin a discussion, we want the most open-ended question that is possible. If we were looking at the topic of managing a group in a discussion, maybe a good opening question would be, tell me about a time when you've tried to lead a group in a discussion, but you completely lost control of the group and achieved nothing. I'm quite sure a number of us would have something to share. Secondly, I invite a response. The key tip here is probably not to be afraid of silence. If we're afraid of silence, like I have in this room talking with yourselves, then when we ask a question, we're going to be awkward, the group members are going to feel awkward. So we need to be relaxed, they will be relaxed. Ask a question, give people a chance to answer. If there's silence, that's not a problem. And the key thing you're resisting here is starting to talk yourself. We want to be facilitators of conversation more than we want to be teachers sitting on a stool, one directional, as I am currently. And this is because people remember 10% of what they hear, but 40% of what they say, and 60 to 70% of what they do. So if we can teach like a good Jewish teacher, asking questions, then people will be engaged, will actually be 4 times more effective as a disciple maker and as an educator. The next thing is how we treat people's responses, and this is rather important if we want them to engage a discussion. For example, if someone answers and we just go, yep, next, we've given no affirmation. The person we've gone yep to might wonder if they gave a wrong answer or if they've done something wrong. Their insecurities come to the fore, and no one else is going to want to talk because maybe they'll have a wrong answer as well. So when a person gives an answer to a question, it's important that we say, hey, great answer. When a person asks a question, it's important that we develop the people skill set of saying, hey, that's a great question. And I remember being at a conference where Q&A time was opened up after every segment. And the speakers from a particular church had to say, great question, every time a question was asked, almost like they were robots. And you picked up on it by observing. But the interesting thing is that every person who asked a question felt emotionally affirmed. And so people loved asking questions and they generated an environment that was highly engaged. So that's an important people skill. Okay, L-I-G. G, go to another person. When someone has answered a question, they may not have answered it fully. They may have answered it incorrectly. They may have even answered it in entirety. It doesn't hurt to still say, has anyone else got anything to say on that? Or you could say, hey, great answer. Thanks for that. Anyone else? I can see some more that we could pack into this. Who else has a thought? So seek to keep the ball going and to draw others out. One tip here is to recognize that our eyes give permission to people to speak, and so does our body language. So for example, if I were talking to you on the camera as I am, and Brett was to interrupt, if I look at Brett, I would be giving permission to him to speak, and I would be ignoring you. And if you were someone who was insecure, right now you'd be feeling neglected. So what I need to do instead is say, hey, thanks, Brett. Can I come to you in a second? Because Fiona's talking at the moment. And I maintain my eye contact here. That gives you permission to continue to speak. That's especially important if the person who is sharing at that moment is a quieter personality type who might stop talking the moment someone interrupts them, while others might be quite happy to do that talking and to take their place. So to ensure that everybody is involved, there are skills involved here. A hand gesture can indicate to a person, hold on a minute. If they are really insistent, you can say, hey, I know what you've got to say is going to be great. Could you come back to me in a moment? I'll just hear Fiona first, but that's an important skill to manage it. Okay, LIGH, H for handle the response. There's going to be a range of people in the room. Talkative people, quiet people. There's going to be jokers. There's going to be slightly depressive people. There's going to be serious and sincere. You're going to have the teacher's pet who gives the right answer every time. They're probably going to be a choleric by personality, task-oriented. No one else is answering. What a dumb bunch. I'll give the answer. Let's get this moving along. There's some great things to discuss here. You have to somehow balance all of those different personality types to give everyone the opportunity at involvement. Here are a few thoughts. First of all, when people give responses, you don't understand what they mean, simply reply with a question. What do you mean by that? Could you clarify? Is it possible? Are you trying to say this, this, and this? And they can then respond to that. Sometimes people will ask a question that's difficult and you don't know the answer to. The solution is quite simple. Admit you don't know the answer. Alpha have discovered in their Alpha courses that when the group leader is honest when they don't know an answer to a question, instead of pretending to be a wise know-it-all, that the chances that the non-believers in that group embrace the Christian faith are increased. Because what they've done is brought authenticity into the dynamic of the conversation. So let's be authentic. If we don't know something, admit it. If the question they've asked is important, we could offer for them, a group member, or ourselves to do a Google search on it or talk to someone during the week, and we could make a note to discuss it again the following week. Sometimes people will bring up things that are irrelevant and off topic. In fact, in some groups, this will happen every single week. The people's skill is very simply to say, great question. It's not on the topic we're looking at today. Would you mind if we came back to that later or another time? And then to try and stay on point. Again, we need to not be afraid of silence. It's a natural part of the journey. And the physical dynamics of a group can make a difference. If you've got a leader and an assistant leader, it's sometimes useful if the leader sits certainly where they can see everybody and have eye contact. That's important for communication and engagement. But the assistant leader could potentially choose to sit next to people who are typically more interrupting, or alternately next to people who are quieter and who could do with some encouragement to participate. So that the leader and assistant leader or leaders, you work as a team to try to help everybody have that opportunity to engage. That will lead to the best environment in your group relationally, because you'll be hearing each other, but also the most enjoyable and meaningful conversation, because many perspectives will make it better. Finally, LIGHT, T for take time to apply and to envision. The goal of our discussions isn't just the learning of the biblical truth, it's the application of that to our lives. What we are gunning for here is life change. So if there's 40 minutes for a discussion, maybe packed into that 40 minutes, you have 10 minutes of content. You have 30 minutes to discuss and engage with that, to personalize it and to apply it. Because that kind of engagement will be far more effective. Never tell when you can ask. Hopefully there's some tips in there that are useful. We're going to turn now to the second topic, which is the final, bringing our 7 previous ones together. We're going to look at a planning calendar, so I'll open my laptop. There are almost full notes on a checklist that you have in front of you. However, you don't need to look at these during the session. Just look at the calendar you have on a piece of paper, or alternately at this video, which will have this on it on the screen. If we go back to our illustration of the primary school teacher, again, we've got someone who spends a crazy 3 to 4 years in tertiary education, spending maybe $80,000 plus accommodation and food on that period in education to teach something to 6 and 8-year-olds that they already knew more than a decade earlier when they were 11 years of age. Why? It's because there are group management skills, but there's also planning skills involved in making education successful. So what we're going to look at now is a planning calendar in which I'm going to give you an example of how you might pull together everything that's been discussed so far, 7 sessions into one plan. And this might seem a little bit Complicated to start with, like there's a lot of details, but again, just imagine how much content is taught in 3 to 4 years of tertiary education. Imagine yourself today to be privileged enough to save $80,000 in 4 years of your life, to have a 20-minute summary on how you could apply some educational theory in your church small group to deliver measurable results in members' lives, helping them become disciples of Jesus. Good value for money, especially since sitting there is free. Please engage, and like when you first ride a bicycle, it feels awkward at first. You're struggling to balance and work out how the momentum of the thing works, but with practice it makes sense. And I have taught what I'm about to show you to 16-year-olds who have been able to apply it and understand it. So once the paradigm is understood, it can make easy sense, and it can be shown to others easier and easier as it becomes part of a culture. So in the calendar, I have drawn up a draft that has mistakes in it, but it has January and February on the screen in front of you, or the paper, and then on the next page, March and April with a grey line through to demarcate the different months. Along the top, there is the 5 W's of the small group agenda: welcome, worship, word, witness, and works. And what we learned about this in a previous session was that there's 2 of these we always have to have, and that is the welcome and the works. It's always about people and welcoming people and caring for people. It's also always about vision and what is coming up. And these represent 2 key dynamics to a healthy group. They represent 2 personality types. If you neglect effectiveness in one of those 2 areas, there's going to be people in your group who are quickly bored and whose participation will begin to drop off. These are like the bread of the sandwich. In the middle then, you'll see you have the worship, word, and witness. And the point is you can choose what type of sandwich you want. You can have one of those, all 3 of those, or none of those in an average week. If we look then down to the 4th week of January, I've put a note in the right-hand column that our Connect group leaders are going to meet together to pray for what's happening in the coming year with the small group. And we're then going to connect personally with every member, whether through a phone call, a text message, meeting them after the service over coffee on Sunday, to invite them back to the small group, to encourage them to invite others. The first week you will then see on the 5th week of January is a social. If it's an hour-and-a-half program, this is 1 hour and 25 of welcome with 5 minutes of works at the end. The key question in that is going to be, how were your holidays? How are things going? What are you looking to do this year? But at the end of it, you always cast vision. You might have some people visiting that social who have not typically been part of your group. You want to invite them or any other new friends to come back the following week. You then want to promote what's happening the next week, because it's going to be a goals session in which we're going to look at goals we might each have and our group could have for this year. Please prioritize coming along, because this is going to set the direction for most of what we do for the rest of the year, and hopefully this will be a group that's really of value to you for this year. That would be your promotion. So, first week of February, your session is based around 3 areas of goals. There are the personal goals, and in a previous session we discussed 8 areas people could set goals in. There's then your outreach goals, which we previously discussed, where we list the names of 5 friends we'd like to encourage toward faith, things that might hinder them coming to faith for prayer and conversation, and interests they have, because those are connection points, both for us personally with them as well as for our group through its social activities. The group could then consider some goals that it might have out of that, and the leader takes copies of each person's goals, noting to protect people's confidentialities. If we go across to the notes column, what we've just done with those goals is we've established what will set direction to nearly everything else we might do in the year. The mandate for your discussions from this point on doesn't come from your leaders. It potentially comes from the feedback they gave you when they said they wanted to grow in area A, B, C, D, or E. So it's actually incredibly empowering for your leadership, because you are now serving their vision for the rest of the year rather than presuming to lead and bring the agenda to the table yourself. In the notes column then, if you have a look at that, and we'll scroll down to March and April as an example. The first thing to go into your calendar needs to be the activities of the church, I would say both in the city but also the local church you're a part of. As a small group, you have stepped out of the correct authority lines if you organise a small group, connect group camp at the same time as the church's increased conference or at the same time as a church camp. You've stepped out of the lines of authority if you organise your own small group social outreach at the same time as a key church outreach event. We need to put the big things in place first. We need to be servants of the wider vision of the church we are a part of. The second thing to go in that column is personal details and reminders related to your group members. So you'll see on the second week of March, Avery's birthday. We then have Ben's birthday, but then a note to invite Chris and Deanna to the marriage course, because in their goals, they said they wanted to strengthen their marriage this year. So as you went through your 12 or 15 members group goals, you've noted in your calendar or on your phone different things that you could encourage them in at different points in the year. This enables you to bring intentionality to your encouragements. This makes them feel really cared for and paid attention to because you bothered to actually remember. But this could help them to take specific steps that will help them to measurably grow. And then we had Erin's birthday further down. Now, if we go across to the welcome column, in a welcome, you want to have an environment that's welcoming. You've got the coffee on, maybe you've got biscuits on the table. You've got the seats in a circle so everybody can be there. The leaders in particular are ready to welcome every person by name, so everybody knows they're a champion and they're appreciated as they arrive. But we also talked in a previous session about a group's life cycle. And a group could go from its starting point, through to a real action community stage, in a period of 4 to 6 months. I've short-tracked it as an example here. But to revise, we have the orientation stage, a group of first meeting. We have the transition stage where you're not sure if you actually like each other because this one talks too much, this one's really opinionated, this one's really quiet and I can't connect with them. But you then get to know each other and come to the community stage. From there, it's the leader's job to turn the community stage to action to focus on serving others. And by God's grace, you connect with others, more people join your group. And the fifth stage is the product of that. It's called multiplication, when you become 2 groups because you've grown. The most dangerous stage, if you recall, was the community stage because we can become inward looking. So to follow down the welcome column, on the first week when you're doing personal goals, there might be people in the room who don't know each other. It's going to be logical that as you begin to say, okay, let's begin a bit of a discussion together. How about we go round and we want to know what each other's name is. We want to know what people might do for a job, where they're from, some basic details about their family. As the relationships grow, further down, you'll see experiences about. Where do you go for holiday? What's one of the best holidays that you've ever had? We begin to understand more. If we cross down to March, I've put their experiences, but related now to our triumphs and our challenges. Let's say most of us in the room happen to be married. What's one of the biggest challenges you've faced in your marriage that you've overcome? So it's a success story, but it's related to real life experience. The trust levels in the group will be really deepening through that journey. But then as the group comes to community, you'll see in April, I've suggested teamwork becomes the theme. And you begin to talk about teamwork, teams people have been a part of, what the group can achieve together. And you could even play little games, which are half the group against the other half, where they have to work together. This helps the group to progress in its relationships toward greater efficiency. If we scroll back up to the second week of February, I suggested that a first discussion for the year could be on the importance of the Word of God in our lives. That's foundational. Imagine at the end of that the application was that everyone commits to read the Bible every day for the next week. Then you need to make a note either in your phone or your planning calendar that when you arrive the next week, you say, hey, by the way, last week we committed to read the Bible every day. Who achieved that? Who achieved 5 days? Who achieved 3 days? Who achieved none? And without making anyone guilty, you reinforce the value. The point here is educational. The saying is, if you don't inspect, you cannot expect. If you don't inspect, if you don't do that, then you are breeding a culture in your group where your group members know they don't have to apply what they commit to at the end of a discussion. If you want measurable growth and we commit to things, you have to lead the group to follow through on those commitments. So that's a really important part of your group DNA if you want measurable results in people's lives. Okay, let's go across to the worship column. The worship in a small group isn't so much about a long time of singing as it is about trying to transition from our relationship with one another to bring God into the picture. A prayer as simple as, thanks Lord that we can meet today. Help our discussion now to be useful, that we would love you and serve you well. In Jesus' name, amen. And that can be all that's needed. However, you might remember that I talked about 3 key areas of growth that could be achieved if we became intentional in the details of our leadership without even interrupting our key discussions. That was to encourage our relationship with God, our love for one another, and our making of disciples. That's our witness in the world around. And I suggested that the key measurable or action step for loving God was that we read our Bibles. Our key measurable for loving one another is that we turn up to church in small group. And our key measurable for making disciples is that we seek to initiate spiritual conversations with people in our daily lives. So how do we encourage those things? If we have a look now at these circles around testimony and prayer, to encourage Bible reading, I suggested to you that on the second week of each month, as you're starting your group, you say, hey, by the way, it's the second week. Every second week of the month, we throw this out. Could anyone share what you've been learning or getting out of your own Bible reading the last few weeks? And if that becomes your habit, you'll breed a culture where group members begin to turn up prepared to share what they've been learning. It reinforces the value of reading the Word and seeking God through it. In terms of encouraging their commitment to fellowship, you welcome them. You say, well done turning up. And you encourage them to come back next week at the end. And if they don't turn up, you follow them up. And maybe try to build a culture in your group where if people can't make it, they'll simply send you a text message to put in their apologies. That would be a respectful team relationship. In terms of making disciples, the other idea that I threw back in that earlier session was that on the first week of the month, you pray for the 5 people that each member identified at the start of the year to encourage toward faith. And it can be as simple as a 5-finger prayer. Let's in 1 minute each pray at once for those 5 people that God will draw them to himself. That reminds people of the vision. And then on the 3rd week of each month, you could invite testimonies where people have sought to initiate and engage spiritual conversations. And again, if this becomes your habit, you will breed that as a culture. So quite simple, but a lot of detail already for some of you, I'm aware. You copy and paste that into each month. If that becomes your habit, separate to your discussions, you could potentially have people reading their Bibles, committed to fellowship, and engaging spiritual conversations. And we haven't yet even looked at what we do in our discussion times. The word column. This one doesn't need very long because it's quite simple. The first week that you meet is a social. There is no discussion around the Word of God. The second week is about goals. You could bring a simple scripture and thought, but it's primarily a discussion and a seeking of God together as to how you want to grow. After that, I gave you an example that you could have one session on the importance of the Word of God in our lives and our commitment to that. That puts a foundation stone in place for the year. The next, as an example, I will always suggest that a church has a series focused on outreach equipping and conversational skills at the start of the year. So let's presume that to be our first topic for 4 weeks. Then in mid-March, you'll see there's a second topic you could look at of your choosing for 5 weeks. And then to finish off, you have a prayer and worship time together 2 weeks before Easter. And then the week before Easter is going to be a social activity where you seek to connect with your friends. The topics can come from your goal setting at the start of the year and the things your members were interested in. And you can grow your members and share the workload also by giving them opportunities to lead those discussions. And the 2 segments we've had in our training on discussion skills could be something you'd share with them if that was useful. Now the witness column. Again, this is part of the makings of the sandwich. It's not the bread. So you don't need to focus on witness every week. And in the example we have in front of us, we have things on most weeks only because I've put an outreach-focused study series in there at the start of the year. So scrolling down to the beginning of February, they established outreach goals, including 5 people that encourage toward faith. Pray for those 5 people. The next week, you discuss doing some social activities as a group. Spend 5 or 10 minutes saying, what could we do that would connect with a whole lot of our friends that we're praying for? Maybe the next week you spend just 5 minutes concluding what you do, and the following week give 10 or 20 minutes to planning a social activity to connect with friends and enjoy yourselves. That gives you maybe 5 or 6 or more weeks to promote that and prepare it before when you do it somewhere near Easter. Then, because you are in an outreach series, it would make sense to revise key lessons. So on the first and second weeks of March, I've suggested revising conversational skills. Like, what are the 3 questions that turn a conversation? What do you mean by that? Where'd you get that idea from? Have you considered? The next week, revising gospel skills. What are the 4 words that summarize the gospel? Creation full, redemption or Jesus, and restoration. Summarize each word in 1 sentence. It's the gospel in 30 seconds. How do you lead a person in a response? It's as simple as ABC. Admit you've done wrong, asking God for forgiveness because you B, believe in what Jesus has done for you at the cross, and C, commit to follow him for the rest of your life. That kind of intentional reiteration puts things you're teaching into long-term memory, and that's kind of the whole point of this, because that enables application, and that will begin to deliver measurable results. The other idea for this column is that when you come into a outreach season, and Easter and Christmas are the most obvious of these, you could give 3 to 6 weeks to give 5 or 10 minutes weekly to revising a key thing related to outreach. So if you imagine, there's an example in your notes, there's an example on this calendar. Let's say we're in mid-November and you've taught things about outreach in February. Are they still going to remember how to turn a conversation, how to summarize the gospel briefly, how to lead a person in a response? They won't if we don't repeat it. That's how education takes place. So you could just plan out that 6 weeks out from Easter, you spend 10 minutes talking about the opportunities in the church and small group life for encouraging people toward faith in Christ over the Christmas period. And then you pray for your friends again. But maybe the next week you intentionally revise conversational skills and practice with a conversation game. Maybe the next week you revise gospel skills, this sort of thing. So that intentionality, as it becomes your habit, will help certain things remain in the perspective set and the application of members permanently. And my experience when I have done this is that that delivers results. The final column is the works column, and we're nearly done. This is, we could say about the announcements, but the point that I did share earlier in the training was that we promote purpose, not program. So to scroll down to have a look, in February, I've included there a note that there is a dawn service here in Tauranga at Hopi Kiori, that's Mount Drury, at 6 a.m. on Waitangi Day. You can encourage, come along, join other believers and local iwi at that. Every week you promote what's coming up. Down in March, on the second week, I've noted that the Hope Project next year, because I know this is happening, is going to be a volunteer-based delivery of booklets to homes. Maybe you hear about that and give it a reiteration in your group to help ensure those gospel booklets are delivered right throughout our city. Further down, you'll notice that there is a promotion of a marriage course happening. Very bad timing in my draft calendar, the beginning of the school holidays. But you promote that for people to come along. Cool Bananas are going to be doing a performance on a Sunday. It's a great chance to invite friends who have children and so on. But it's always about promoting the purpose, not the program. You don't say there's a marriage course starting in 4 weeks' time at 7 p.m. It'll be really good, come along. Instead, you say, our marriages need work, right? Who's ever had a marriage that didn't need work? Maybe you share a personal example and just say, this is going to be like a health check. So why don't you commit to come along? I'm going to be going. But are any of your friends you're trying to encourage toward faith, are they married? Would they like their relationship strengthened? Why don't you invite them? And then to make your promotion sticky, have a promotional flyer available and put something in their hands to pass on. And maybe send them a Facebook group invite or something to it as well, so they can use digital media. So that is it. And as I said at the start, the principles here are quite simple. Disciples aren't born, they're made. The key word for the disciple is choice. The key word for the disciple maker is intentionality. We need to present people with the opportunities to grow. We need to bring the best of our leadership acumen to the table while being fully dependent on the Spirit, 100% of both. Teachers don't do 3 to 4 years of tertiary education to teach kids things they knew already when they were 11 for no reason. And if you feel that there's been quite a few details here, there has been. There's 1 page of checklist notes sitting in front of you. but a little like driving a car for a first time, with a manual gear trying to go from second to third with the clutch on and the accelerator off. It feels awkward. But as you commit to understanding the process, you'll begin to realize there's actually a simple leadership logic to this. And as these things become your habit, that will breed culture, and culture breeds results. Is this worth the effort? I would simply suggest that when we begin to reach October and November each year, and we revise those goals we set at the start of the year, maybe in July, but then we review them and look at how we've changed in October, November, when you've got testimonies consistently year upon year of people growing, and this has been a result of your intentionality, you'll realize that this little bit of effort is worth it. And again, as a final thought, to reiterate the importance of our connect groups and church small groups, the early church met in large groups and in small groups. It met in the synagogue and it met from house to house. When Nero began the persecution of the Christian church, which lasted about 250 years, it no longer met in large groups, it still met in small groups. And the church grew. The church can be healthy when it only meets in small groups. The purpose of the small group isn't just fellowship. The purpose of the small group is every purpose of the church. Everything we do at the congregational level, we do at the small group level to produce disciples who are grown maturely. All of this is supposed to be happening there under our leadership. The point to note is that when Constantine came to faith and the empire embraced Christianity, that the church small group structure died, the church became structured. And when it was only large groups without small groups, the church became corrupted and the church didn't grow. There's more than 50 love one another type statements in the New Testament. We can't apply them in a big group. They require personal relationship. Growth requires vision and goals and accountability and encouragement and support and help. What we do in our small groups is incredibly important. If we're diligent in it, we can produce measurable change and growth in people's lives, and also create a context in which more people will come to faith. Do what you do with diligence. I hope this has helped.